I have it. Okay, great. I have it for all of them. Hitting play now.
Passionate, outspoken, insightful. Ariva Martin is an award-winning civil rights attorney, best-selling author, legal commentator, and America's advocate. Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
Good morning and welcome to our viewers in the U.S. and around the world. To kick off this morning's broadcast, do me a favor, please share the show with your online friends or start a viewing party. And remember to post a comment or question. Your voice matters and I want to hear from you. A staggering 51.3 million Americans have filed for unemployment over the past 17 weeks during the pandemic. Millions of these Americans have survived on the $1,200 stimulus check from the federal government sent out in April and the $600 boost on top of their weekly unemployment benefits. That additional $600 that helped millions of people pay for rent and other critical expenses during the COVID-19 crisis will end a week before most people expected. Now, although the benefits officially end July 31st, states will pay it only through this Saturday or Sunday, depending on the state. And despite current deliberations in Congress and spikes in coronavirus cases in more than 32 states, there is no agreement among lawmakers to replace the $600 supplemental payment. Democrats are pushing to have the benefit extended until at least January, but many Republicans say Americans make more money on unemployment, thus de-incentivizing them from returning to work. Democrats, leading economists, and activists push back on this narrative and point to the still alarming high unemployment rates and argue that slashing the benefits could be dire for families in need. Today, we're asking how will the millions of Americans that rely on this benefit survive? And later in the show, I go one-on-one with Reverend William Barbour, the nation's leading authority on poverty. So let's get started. My first guest is Cara. She is a bartender in New Jersey who has been waiting for, get this, 17 weeks for her unemployment benefits. She has not received $1 of unemployment since being laid off in March and is now having to decide between paying for groceries or gas. Welcome to the show, Cara. Good morning.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Wow, your story, it captured the attention of our production team. It caught my attention because 17 weeks is a really long time to be waiting for unemployment benefits. Tell us what's happening around your benefits and in your state.
So I'm in New Jersey. I'm just outside of Manhattan. It's actually been 19 weeks now, 17 since the pandemic unemployment assistance went into effect. But no, I haven't seen any money from it. From what I've told, besides myself, there are 250,000 residents of New Jersey that aren't able to collect these claims. We're in some sort of black hole. Our claim still says pending when you log on every day to check the benefits. After calling 81 times in 1 hour, I was finally able to get through to someone on June 25th and was told my claim was escalated and that a supervisor would call me in 7 days. And it's July 22nd, and that hasn't happened yet. And there's no resolution.
So I just want to ask you, Cara, what happened with your job? Was your bar forced to close because of
Yes.
Orders by the state?
Yes. So the bar I work in was shuttered on March 16th was our last day. So my last day of employment was March 15th. When I applied for the unemployment assistance, even though I do own my own business, a small business, the bar is how I make my money. And, we were told, oh, don't worry, it'll be April 1st, you'll be back to work. And then on March 25th, I realized that wasn't happening. So we were ordered to close. We are still ordered to close. Indoor dining is on indefinite hold right now in New Jersey.
Do you know if your bar has brought any of its employees back? You know, people like yourself who were
No, we're fully closed. Yeah, we're
wow.
fully closed. Yeah.
So you did mention, Kara, that you own your own business. Are you, receiving any income from that small business?
I was allowed to reopen on June 22nd, and it is fascial stretch therapy. So people are still a little wary of body work, especially because I'm an in-home business. I travel to my clients. Fortunately, some of my teammates from my soccer team have come together. They've been getting sessions. I have some clients that are still calling, but that's really, the bar was my main source of income. It provided me a lot of opportunity to create this business and continue my education in the field. And it's really hurting right now.
Yeah, take us to that day where you literally said you made 81 phone calls to the unemployment
Yes.
office.
So
An inconceivable number of calls to make, but it shows how diligent you have been in terms of getting these benefits. Did anyone answer any of those calls?
So actually, what I find most upsetting is that I find more information rather on Twitter than I do through the government websites or anyone else that I can call. I tried my congressman, I tried my senator. The New Jersey Department of Labor just isn't answering phone calls, plain and simple. And I found out on Twitter, the one woman said, keep calling, hanging up, calling until you get a different voice giving you those menu options, and then you can get through. And that was what I did. And the day my call was escalated, I had called another 70 times in an hour to get through.
So you've made over 150 calls to this one office and still haven't
Well over that, yeah.
received $1.
No.
So I've got to ask you, Kara, how have you been surviving and what has it been like?
I have to say that I'm very fortunate in my situation that I have my mother and I have a roof over my head. But I do have expenses like medications and doctor's appointments because in 2018, which was at that point the last tax return I had filed, I made too much for Medicaid, but not enough to afford the premium payments through Marketplace. So I'm uninsured. So sometimes my medications are $100 a month. If I have to see a doctor, that could be up to $275 for an appointment. So what little I had from my savings, that was exhausted pretty much right in the beginning. The stimulus check and my mother helping me out, I've been able to get by. But she's of retirement age now. She doesn't want to support her 40-year-old daughter. It's not fair to ask her to keep doing that. And like I said, I'm fortunate. I have a roof over my head. I don't have children, so I don't have to worry about sending them to school or paying for any, things that childcare requires.
Tell us what it's been like, though, Kara. You told our producer that you literally some days have to make decisions about whether you're going to pay, for gas for your car, or, pay for medication or pay for food.
Yeah, you have to get really creative when you don't have anything. And I know millions of other people are going through the same thing. But like I said, I'm a traveling business. So am I going to put gas in my car to get to that appointment? Am I buying that medication? Am I able to go to the grocery store? These are all things that are kind of up in the air.
How does it make you feel, Kara, to know, first of all, you haven't gotten any money, so I know that has to be just so incredibly frustrating. But now to hear that the supplemental $600 payment is coming to an end, within days, that benefit will no longer be available. So even if you were getting your unemployment, you wouldn't continue to get that $600 enhancement. How does that make you feel?
Well, from what I've spoken to one of my coworkers, she's able to claim $120 a week for her unemployment. We have the same hours, so I'm assuming that's going to be our base pay. That, like I said, I live in the New York metropolitan area. $600 is nothing. And when I hear people say it de-incentivizes people to return to work, that is absolutely not the case. I've worked 2 jobs my entire adult life. Bartending, I've been doing for 23 years. There's nothing I want more than to be able to go back to work and be independent again and collect, a salary per se, and, just be normal again, even though I know that's, there's a new normal now. But there's a lot of anxiety around it. And the only thing I can do is, try to keep my sense of humor, because if I let that drag me down, it would be a black hole.
Yeah, I'm like you, Kara. I feel you when you say it makes my blood boil when you hear certain lawmakers say that people are incentivized in terms of going
Yeah.
back to work, as if people are lazy or somehow that they're just taking advantage of this amount. Which, living in New Jersey, I've lived in New York City, so $600 a week is barely enough money to scrape by to pay rent, pay gas, pay
Yeah.
utilities. So it's rather insulting. So I agree with you on that. I want to bring Delana into this conversation. She's been receiving unemployment and she's actually received the $600 enhancement, but she says the anticipated loss of that will be devastating for her. Good morning, Delana. How are you?
Good morning. I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good. So unlike Kara, you've actually been able to obtain your unemployment benefits. You're in a different state. You're in Georgia, right?
That's correct.
And you've been getting this $600 enhancement. So how have you, been surviving this time, being out of work?
Well, honestly, it took about 8 weeks for my unemployment to go through. So that was, within that time, a time frame of me not having any income. And so it kind of put a strain on my savings account because I had already left my prior job in state to move to Georgia to start my business, Delina the Doula. And once I did that, I really relied heavily on my savings account, not really anticipating coronavirus and that I wouldn't be able to work and that I would have to run through my savings. So at this point, the extra $600 has been getting me through. I'm still not allowed in a lot of the delivery rooms because of Corona and what I do. So it has put a strain on my business. So once the $600 ends, at the end of the month, I kind of will be back in the same position that I started in when all this, was going down. Luckily with quarantine, people have been home. So there's a lot of babies that are on the way for 2021. So I do have people that are inquiring about those services, but that's still 6 months out, you know what I mean, before I can see payment on any of that. So going forward from this time frame that they cut off the additional $600, I'm not really sure how I'll get by.
So we heard Kara say in New Jersey, the base unemployment for someone like her is going to be about $120 a week. Do you know what your base unemployment will be in Atlanta, Georgia, once the $600 is gone?
Based off of based off of the information that I received, it's going to go down to about $300. That's the base pay.
So can you survive in a big city like Atlanta, with $300 a week?
Absolutely not. Between groceries and rent, my car payment, and also, so I am high risk for COVID. I have asthma. So I have a $300 inhaler that I have to pay for every month. So that's absolutely not going to get me through.
Wow. And I imagine you may find yourself in a similar situation as Kara, where you have to make decisions about, do you pay for your inhaler, this something you need for
Mhm.
your health, versus paying your rent or, putting gas in your car, putting food on the table. Have you thought about how you'll make those tough choices?
I find myself stretching out my medication. So it is something that I'm supposed to take on a daily basis. And I find myself only taking it as needed, when I feel like an asthma flare up or something like that, just trying to cut corners where I can. Luckily, my family has been supportive. My friends have been supportive and, making sure that I have the things that I need. But going forward, it is something that I'm going to have to figure out.
And how do you feel, Delana, when you hear the president or you hear these GOP lawmakers say that somehow, cutting this $600 back is going to de-incentivize people from going to work? How does that make you feel?
It's frustrating, especially for me, as my ambitions as a small business owner, I projected that I'd be making well over the amount that they are giving me. And don't get me wrong, I'm definitely grateful to have that income, but I was hopeful that my business would do well. I had a lot of inquiries before I came to the Atlanta area, a lot of people reaching out for my services. So the amount that I was anticipating making is more than what I'm receiving currently. So it's a little frustrating because, like I said, I'm very grateful for the amount because otherwise I wouldn't have anything coming in. However, it's not something that not to say that I'm settling for, but I definitely feel like I said, I have ambition enough to make more.
I want to bring into the conversation now financial planner and life coach Lynn Richardson. She is the author of The Symphony, and Lynn is a friend of the show. She's been here before as we've been tackling these difficult issues about how people survive during this pandemic. Welcome back, Lynn.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, whenever I hear these stories or we read about these stories, you're the first person I think about because, you know, we want to on this show help people figure out how to survive. I mean, these are devastating stories. These are hardworking, ambitious women, you know, opposite sides of the country, but both experience something very similar in that, you know, they're not going to have enough money to make ends meet, to make those critical payments, rent, you know, medication, food, and they're not alone. There are millions and millions of people who are already in this situation or will be, you know, come July 25th when that $600 payment ends. What advice can you give to Cara and to Delina, you know, Lynn, based on your years of experience as a financial planner?
Well, thank you so much. And my heart and my prayers are definitely with you both and with everybody who is struggling right now. The truth of the matter is that we all have to remember our power. And I remember struggling during the recession of 2008, and it wasn't a pandemic that caused it, but it certainly was an economic crash that caused many people to fail. And so what I learned during times like this, not only from being a financial professional who have helped people, but as a human being, just like everybody else who has suffered through it, is the first thing we have to do is remember to put things in perspective. I heard, you know, anxiety and feeling inadequate and not wanting to ask for help. Remember, this is not something that you did to yourself. This is something that happened. So now is a time to ask help. So if you have to stay with mom, if you have to ask a friend or a family member, I know we want to be independent, but really this time is about putting things in perspective so we can think clearly. Once you put things in perspective, then you have to make one decision at a time. What causes anxiety and confusion is trying to make all of the decisions. And the very first decision that all of us have to make is the basics: food, clothing, and shelter, and our health. So if you have your health, you should never question getting your medicine. You should never question getting your inhaler. You need your inhaler. You need your inhaler so you can breathe and so that energy can move through your body. So now you can think clearly about the next step. And so I want everybody to really understand. I know we have bills. I know we have other expenses. I know we have gas. I know we have creditors. But the truth is, without our peace of mind and our health, then we won't even be here to take care of those things. Once you have food, clothing, shelter, and your health is in order, then you make one decision at a time. What I hear with both of these beautiful ladies is that you have your own business. Hopefully, you can still apply for the Paycheck Protection Program and or the EIDL. They started out with a little bit of a hassle trying to get them, but I know, and from my own experience, people who applied on Friday and received their funds or at least their application on a Saturday. So if you are self-employed, that is still one of the quickest ways to get funding, but also to expand your business and to find other ways to improve your income situation. And then finally, what I would say,
Lynn, I want to ask both Cara and Delina if they have applied for the Payroll Protection Plan loan or the EIDL, which is the emergency disaster loan. Have either of you ladies applied for any of those benefits?
I did apply for the EIDL. I only qualified for $1,000.
Wow. What about you, Cara? Did you apply for either the emergency disaster loan or the PPP?
I did not apply for either. The Paycheck Protection Program does not apply to my business. I'm self-employed. I am the only employee, and I've only really been in business since November of 2019. So just as I was getting started, everything came back down. The disaster loan I did not apply for just because I have so many outstanding bills and things coming in that I just didn't want another loan. But I did apply to the bartending guilds and I have received grants. And it's been, you know, I've had friends and strangers reach out after seeing what we all have been going through, and people really want to help people. And it's been encouraging in that aspect that total strangers want to help you.
yeah, that's amazing. And I would say for the Paycheck Protection Program, you actually are qualified. If you are self-employed, all you need is your name and your social security number. You can apply, and as long as you've been in business prior to February 15th, you qualify, and prior to January 31st for the EIDL. So I still,
perfect.
I still do highly recommend. And this is what I say to people: get the money. Don't worry about paying it back right now. Even if you choose not to keep the money, you can always send it back. Because if you get the funds, you have the funds there. Maybe you want to start an online virtual bartending class. I come. Right? Because everybody's having Zoom parties right now. So we have to start thinking of other ways to bring in income. And I don't mean to belittle the scenario, because I know it is a dire situation. But the truth is, even when you're in a dire situation, if you can look up, you can get up. And just like you made those 80 phone calls, those 70 phone calls, you've got to keep dialing for your own opportunity. So I would highly recommend still getting the EIDL. Let the money sit in your account. It's not even due for a whole year after you get the funds. And if you never use them, then send them back. But if you need them to expand your business so you can make more money, it's a small interest rate over a 30-year period. Perhaps it could end up being a good financial situation for you. So I say get all that you can, then make the decision after you get what you have to see what's going to be the best situation for your scenario.
Great advice. Thank you.
I know, Lynn, when you were on the program previously, you were able to provide some of those online services that make getting those PPP loans easier for small business owners or, self-employed individuals like Cara and Delina. What are some of those resources that people can turn to so that they don't have to go to the big banks, who can make that, big banks have made the process, we know. Some have been okay, but a lot of them have made this process, overly cumbersome, particularly for small businesses.
Oh, absolutely. First, if you go to ourfairshare.com, there are a couple of videos and several resources there. You can apply through PayPal, you can apply through Bluevine, you can apply through Cabbage, you can apply through really your local community banks are also really great. And so right now, the Paycheck Protection Program, the program was so well funded that even when it ended a few weeks ago, the Senate and the House actually extended it until August 8th. So there are many ways to get funded. If all of those fail, go to asklynn.org. You'll get an automatic reply from my team, and we'll guide you each step of the way. In addition to that, there are so many other additional funding opportunities that become available, especially for women-owned businesses and for minority-owned businesses. So I say, keep things in perspective. Do not allow anxiety to cloud your judgment. You need your good judgment. You need your health. And if you have food, clothing, and shelter, remember that you're 3 steps ahead, and you can continue taking those steps towards financial peace, even during these turbulent times.
And Lynn, I know one of the other things that you have talked a lot about, you mentioned briefly kind of online services that people can do to bring in income. But I think some of the other help that I know you provided to other viewers of ours was talking about how people can structure their payments and how they, get through tough times by really working with their creditors. Can you give some advice to Cara and Delina in terms of how they can work, with their existing creditors? Because one of the things we're hearing is that when this $600 payment in, we're going to have an economic crisis that includes now an eviction crisis and a mortgage crisis, because people aren't going to be able to pay their rent or their mortgages. So what are some of the things they can do now to address some of those incoming bills?
Well, definitely right now is not the time to be a credit hero. It's the time to protect your credit, but you want to take advantage of any extensions of time that any of your creditors are offering. So after you eliminate every single thing that's unnecessary, after you eliminate unnecessary subscriptions, unnecessary memberships, and then you're left with your bills, you want to contact each creditor. You want to keep a notebook. You want to ask every single question possible, their name, their ID, and you want to ask for every possible available extension of time to pay that does not impact your credit. And when that extension of time is up, let's say they give you 3 months, at the end of 2 months, you want to call them back and say, I'm going to need more time. Most of the creditors now, when you log into your online account, they have a link that says, do you need services, or do you need an extension of time to pay, or are you still suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic? You want to say yes, and you want to get as much time as possible. Then you're even more free now to use whatever cash flow you have strategically to help you with your business and to continue. See, it's all about jobs. It is about either finding a job or creating a job. And while you're doing that, keeping your cash flow as robust as possible so that you can take advantage of those opportunities.
And I know one of the other things, Lynn, that often comes up, people talk about their credit. Everybody is concerned about their credit scores. We know how important it is in this country to have a good credit score. Is that something that Delina or Kara should be concerned about at this point?
Well, yeah, I will say that if you ask for an extension of time to pay, it will not negatively impact your credit score. As a matter of fact, any delinquencies that occurred after the pandemic, I believe the date is January 31st, the credit bureaus are not allowed to report late payments if you communicate. So you definitely want to communicate. The second thing is you want to be sure that if you have a mortgage, if you have a student loan, these government-backed programs have provided extensive deferments up to a year in some cases, and probably even more. So you want to stay connected, you want to continue to communicate, and quite frankly, you want to pay as few bills as possible. Now, what I'm saying goes against financial stability in a normal time, but these are not normal times. You must keep enough cash flow for your health. You need cash flow for food, you need cash flow for shelter, and everything else becomes a second and or third priority.
Right. And Delina, have you had that experience where you've had to, contact your creditors and try to get your creditors to actually work with you during this period?
Absolutely. Especially with my rent situation. Luckily, my landlord has been understanding. She's a private owner, so I don't know if that's still the eviction thing still applies to her as far as them not being allowed to evict people at this time. I don't know if that still applies to her. Either way, she's been very understanding about it, and definitely like my credit card, my auto loan, all those companies have been working with me and trying to help me get back on the right path.
And I know, Lynn, you're a big proponent of online businesses and how people can make income during this difficult time online. Are there any recommendations? So Delina says she's a doula. Is there, any recommendation you would give to her?
I certainly would look into any kind of opportunity to coach women during this particular time, either online to provide online coaching. The truth is, while there are many people who are struggling financially, there are still many people who keep their jobs. There are many people who are working from home. There are many people who have home-based businesses. There are many people who do have the ability to get online education. So I look to take my skills that I normally would take in a travel situation or moving around. I'm in the entertainment business. I am in the entertainment business, and effective with the pandemic, every single performance, every single appearance ended. However, we still had online services that we were able to provide. And if we did not have online services, we created them. We created them. You develop a presence on social media. You continue to get your message out. And that's why you need good health. That's why you need a clear mind. Because when you have good health and a clear mind, then creativity can be born from you, and you can find additional opportunities. And I don't want to make light of it. I don't want to make it look like, well, there are no problems and everything is going to be great. What I can say is you have to stay in the game. And I believe when you stay in the game and you keep walking, you keep working, you keep doing with the right energy and with the right intention, I believe you will collide into the opportunities that are going to provide you with the cash flow that you need, even during this season. Write a book, do speaking engagements, start a blog. There are so many things that can be done during this time. YouTube, people have started YouTube pages. YouTube is paying money. There are so many things that we can do with our skills and our talents that will bring us income in if we keep working towards that goal.
Wow, Lynn, you always have such amazing advice. I'm so grateful, for you to come on and to share that advice. And I heard a lot of things in there, Delina, that you can do. I think we lost our feed with Kara, but I want to wish both Kara and Delina, wish you both well.
Thank you.
We hope that this situation gets resolved and that you don't have to resort to any, extreme measures. And if you follow just half of the things that Lynn recommended this morning, I'm sure you'll be incredibly successful. Again, thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing your knowledge and your insights with us. Always a pleasure to see you. Good luck to you, ladies.
Thank you.
These are some difficult times, and now we've talked about practical things, and Lynn gave some great advice to both Kara and Delina, and it's advice that all of our viewers can use. But now we're going to talk about, the policies. What happens when, millions of Americans lose these unemployment benefits? What are the policies that are widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots in this country? Without dramatic policy changes, 500 million people will be pushed into poverty globally as a result of the pandemic. Millions of them live right here in the United States. I am super excited about my next guest. He is the nation's foremost authority on poverty. He's a minister, a civil rights leader, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, and author of We Are Called to Be a Movement. Joining me this morning is Reverend Dr. William Barbour. Good morning, Dr. Barbour. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I've often seen you on CNN and I hear about your exploits and your power, but thank you for having me this morning in these serious times.
Well, I can't tell you how excited when my producer told me that you were actually available and free and we're coming onto the show. I'm an advocate, so I'm always just super excited when I get to meet who I consider to be the ultimate advocates, in this time. And you are definitely the ultimate advocate for, people all over this country and all over the globe. And the reason I wanted to talk to you this morning is because something really drastic is about to happen in this nation. We are in the midst of this pandemic, rising cases all over the country. And in the midst of this, the government is talking about, ending this $600 supplemental benefit that has been the lifeline for millions of Americans. And the economists are clear. This is going to plunge millions of people into poverty. And you being an expert on poverty, what are we to make of these policies that keep widening this gap between the haves and the have-nots?
Well, 2 weeks ago on June 20th, well, a little bit over 2 weeks, 30 days ago, so we had the Mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington, a digital gathering, and over 2.7 million people turned in and 400,000 people took action because we focused on what poverty already looks like from the Appalachian Mountains to Alabama, from Maine to Mississippi. And I think we have to always start there. Before COVID ever hit, we had 140 million people living in poverty, Sister Martin, 43% of this nation, 700 people dying a day from poverty, and 250,000 people a year. And then we had 3 bills passed, and McConnell made it sure that 84% of all the money went to corporations and corporate heads and banks, not to the essential workers. In fact, a lot of the essential workers tell me they feel like expendable. They say, you call us heroes, but you treat us like zeros. This is what we're hearing in the street. And so in the midst of that, those bills, unemployment was not guaranteed, sick leave was not guaranteed, healthcare was not guaranteed, rent forgiveness was not guaranteed, making sure that utilities couldn't be cut off were not guaranteed. And yet corporations were guaranteed nearly $3 or $4 trillion. Right. So we have to first start with the bad policies that already exist and why poor and low income people have to get engaged. I like what your former guest was talking about, preparing, and then we need to add to that political engagement and using the internet and telephones and otherwise to be jamming these lines. Because what we're facing right now, if we don't pass another bill, and I think McConnell this morning said he's going to limit it to $1 trillion. Right. That's not enough. The House has passed $3 trillion, and that's not enough because it still doesn't guarantee health care, nor does it guarantee living wages for essential workers. So here's what we may end up with. Columbia University said we've already lost 50,000 people that didn't have to die, that could have been prevented. At least 50, it could be higher. We're talking about if this happens, we will have more Black, brown, Native, and poor white people who will die needlessly. On July 27th, the unemployment insurance will end. Right. 50 million people have filed unemployment insurance since March. Right. That's 58% of Black households lost their work, and 56% of people earning less than $50,000 lost their work. And we're hearing now that 40% of the jobs that made $40,000 and less will lose those jobs. That's the crisis that we're in, which is why poor and low wealth people must be engaged, must prepare to vote, because the only way we can turn this around is to turn it around through public policy and people that are willing to do that.
I know, Reverend Barbour, you've been on the front lines of fighting for a living wage. And I read an article where one economist said we wouldn't have the big issue we have over this $600 supplemental benefit if people made a living wage. If people made a minimum of $15 an hour, we wouldn't have this issue that we have with respect to unemployment benefits. Have we made any progress? I know I live in Los Angeles, so I know Los Angeles and other cities, Seattle, near California, have already enacted ordinances that have raised the minimum wage to a minimum of $15. But on a national level, where are we in terms of getting to a national living wage?
Well, where we are is, you're right, there's certain places have in fact done that. Now, some of them have put it on a gradual scale, which we don't agree with, because by the time you get to 7 years from now, 15 will be too low. But we have seen some progress. And just this past Monday, we had a strike for Black lives, in which white and black and brown and young and old and gay and straight took strikes from their jobs to say we need to protect voting rights, we need $15 in the union, and we need health care. Now, where we are is, as I said, not one of the bills we passed in the midst of COVID. I want to think about this. In the midst of COVID, how hard-hearted McConnell is being. They refuse to even give low-income essential workers a bonus, let alone a living wage. And we're talking about the people who are upholding this economy. You see, before COVID, 62 million people made less than a living wage. That meant that there's not a county in this country where you can afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment, even if you work 40 hours plus at a minimum wage job. Federally, the bill has already been passed in the House, Sister Martin. And I'm from the country, so I do sister. I'm sorry, but that's just a preacher thing. But the bill has been passed in the House. It's being held up by McConnell in the Senate. Now, when it comes to giving corporations money, they get $2 trillion in 48 hours. When it comes to our people getting health care and living wages, nothing. Now, if people had made a living wage, they would have resources. You see, when we talk about poverty and low wealth today, we're talking about some people are poor and low wealth who work every day, who work 50 hours a week, but they're less than $400 away from an economic disaster. And a study just came out yesterday that said if you do not have health care and you go to the hospital to get treated for COVID symptoms, even if you live, your bill could be $75,000. $75,000. So, but here's the other side: a living wage of $15 an hour. Now think about this: 25 million people are receiving unemployment. That's $15 billion. If we don't pass a new bill to cover that, $15 billion will drop from the economy immediately. And some are saying 10 million people are homeless, can't afford, even before COVID. And we're talking about 26 million people that could face evictions if we don't pass another bill. Now, here's the flip side. If we had paid $15 an hour, or if we started tomorrow, they could pass it tomorrow. 49 million people would move from poverty and low wealth immediately. And $368 billion would be added to the economy immediately. Think about that now. If we don't pass this bill, $15 billion could drop out, boom, immediately. But if we were to pass living wages, $360+ billion could be pushed into the economy immediately. And if it was a housing wage, it was something like 73 million people would be raised out of poverty and low wealth, and the number would be in the 700 and some odd billion dollars. So we're hurting ourselves. That's the point. The cost of inequality it costs less to fix inequality and poverty than it does to allow it to continue.
And then that's the big question, Reverend Barbour. If these, if it's in our economic best interest to increase the living wage and to enact these policies that you've just identified, why do we see this resistance? Why are we fighting, trying to get, working class people $600 when wealthy people have gotten trillions of dollars from the Stimulus Act, from the Trump tax cut, and so many other policies that favor the wealthy in our society? Why are we begging for crumbs at this point?
Well, I think three things are happening in this country. Number one, both political parties have been locked into a neoliberalism understanding of economics. And for the Republicans, that means you give to the top and trickle down. For the Democrat, it means you talk about the middle class. You never talk about poverty and low wealth for the most part. The fact of the matter is, if we don't address from the bottom up, we're not going to fix this. Too often Republicans racialize poverty, Democrats run from poverty. What we need to do is focus on poverty. That's one thing. Second thing is, we have voter suppression. And people say, well, what does that have to do with poverty and low wealth? Every state that is a voter suppression state, we've had 26 of those since 2010, where people get elected because of racialized voter suppression. There's something like 26 members of the United States House that owe their on the Republican side, that owe their elections pretty much to racist voter suppression. Once we can measure and we can show statistically how people who get elected through racist voter suppression also vote against living wages, also vote against health care. So they get elected for a process that targets Black people and brown people, but once they get elected, they go after all people, regardless of their race and color, because their goal is to give more money to the corporate, because their mindset is trickle down. The third thing is, we have to have a new people in office. But here's the good news. We have a study coming out. I can't break it all today, but basically this study is going to show how if just 10 to 12, 15% of poor, low income people were registered to vote who didn't vote, they fundamentally changed the political calculus in every state in this country, even in the South, where 1/3 of all poor people live. We can actually bring Black and white people together through this economic issue that also shows how racism is connected to the economic disparity for all people. And Dr. King told us in '65, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March, he said, every time there's a possibility for Black and brown, white, poor people to come together, the aristocracy sows division. So here we are almost 100 days from the election. Poor and low wealth people, that's what we're doing. We're organizing in the hills of Kentucky and in the Delta of Mississippi, have the power to change the United States Senate and to change the presidency and to fundamentally shift the votes, the voting in this country. So I'm saying the parties that want to win, you need to make sure you're investing in poor and low wealth people, because all of these changes, charity is good, churches giving out food is good, we do that, but you can't fix 58% of Black households, losing their work with just charity. You cannot fix 140 million people in poverty, 43% of the nation. And the stats tell us it's going to be over 50% in the midst of COVID eventually. Those things can't be fixed privately. You have to have public policy adjustment.
I just have two questions for you. I know you've got to run, Reverend Barbour, but I want to ask you, so often in this country, when people think of poor people, they think of minorities. And with Trump in office, he has demonized minorities and has, sown the seeds of division between, people of color and white people in this country. And a lot of people have this vision that when they are helping poor people or they're voting for policies that impact poor people, that they're somehow helping Black and brown people, not recognizing that, poverty has no color. How do we, change that narrative and get people to understand the reality of poverty, that poverty impacts, as you talked about, poor white people are as negatively impacted by these policies as African Americans, Latinos, and other people of color?
Well, Trump is using the Southern strategy from the 1960s that was designed intentionally to keep Black and white people and brown people from talking to each other, so that the Republican Party could control the South, the 13 former Confederate states, and thereby control 170 electoral votes. So this is an old game that he's playing. He's just more vicious and more vocal of how he's doing it. The reality is, though, we have to teach. And so we've been traveling across this country. That's the Poor People's Campaign, National Call for Moral Revival. We have 45 coordinating committees. And when we go in, we show people the intersections. And when we say this in the room, what I'm getting ready to say to you now, people curse in ways I can't talk because they didn't know. I mean, they say, what the? And I said, well, hold up now, but let's do something about it. There are 140 million poor and low wealth people. Now let's break that down. 61% of all African Americans are poor and low wealth. 61%. So African Americans are disproportionately affected by poverty. 68% of Latinos. But 61% of African Americans in raw numbers is 26 million people. 31 to 32% of white people are poor and low wealth. But in raw numbers, that's 66 million people. So there are 40 million more poor and low income white people in raw number than there are in black people. So it has a disproportionate effect on black people. But in raw numbers, there are more white people on SNAP, more white people on food stamp, more white people in poverty and low wealth than black. When we were in Kentucky, Ariva, we were teaching this up in the mountains in Harlan County. And I put up a map and showed all of the people that got elected in Kentucky by racist voter suppression. And then I showed how those same people vote against healthcare and vote against unions that those coal miners need and vote against living wages. And one guy looked at that and he said, well, damn, excuse me, but that's what he said. He said, well, damn, Reverend, we're being played against each other. And I said, that's what I'm trying to teach you. And then he said, well, we need to get together. And we said, well, let's do that. And so now they're organizing in Harlan County, predominantly white, and Louisville, you know, a great number of blacks. They turned 3 counties in Kentucky from red, so-called red to blue. White folk organizing with black folk around an agenda that deals with race and poverty. So you're exactly right. We have to make America understand this, that you cannot racialize poverty, right? You have to realize, in fact, we have to teach people this. My grandmother said, if you scratch a lie, you find a thief. So if racism is a lie, if you scratch a racist, you find a thief. If a person is a racist, they'll also steal your health care. They'll steal your living wages. They'll steal your clean air and your clean water because they'll allow the corporate polluters. So ultimately, racism is targeted systemically at black and brown people, but racism is really a hatred for democracy itself. Racism is.
I gotta let you go, Reverend Barbour, because I promised your team I would. But before you get out of here, tell us how people can join the Poor People's Movement and how we can take action to be a part of this movement that is really going to change, you know, this entire country.
Well, I've just heard something good news today. I've got to verify, but I just heard the Democrats put a major platform for the first time in their platform called Ending Poverty. And we've been pushing to change the narrative. Go to www.breachrepairs.org or either www.june2020.org. This coming Sunday, we are rebroadcasting the Mass Poor People Assembly, Moral March on Washington, a digital affair. You can tune in at 4 o'clock. You can sign up then. You can also take action with us. And this focus now, we're turning to voting and registering people to vote. And so join us this coming Sunday at 4 o'clock on the East Coast. If you can't do that, just go to www.june2020.org or www.breachrepairs.org. Sign up, join up, let's fight together. And if we lift from the bottom, everybody rise. You can't lift from the middle, can't lift from the top. We have to lift from the bottom.
Okay, before I let you go, you have to promise me to come back, spend an hour with me. I'm a civil rights lawyer and an advocate, and there's so much more I want to ask you and so much more I want to talk to you about.
So what am I going to do? Stay on the web? No. You are a lawyer indeed.
Okay, I got you. And I got thousands and thousands of witnesses.
Yeah, I don't want to be on the stand when you interrogate me. I don't want to be on the stand when you interrogate me. But listen, we would like to talk about the 5 interlocking injustices, because here's the last thing I would say. You cannot separate them. As I tell people, if you look at me and if you happen to like me, you have to also deal with the fact that I am the result of a whole lot of fusion. Now, some of it wasn't maybe welcome, but the reality is I'm part Tuscarora, I'm part white, I'm part black. I come from the country, I've lived in the city. All of that helps make up who I am. But what am I talking about? We say that there are 5 interlocking injustices that you have to deal with simultaneously. It's almost like when you're prosecuting a case as a lawyer, you have to look at all the pieces. Systemic racism in all of its forms toward black people, brown people, and native people. Systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of health care, the war economy, because all the money we need to do this is in the bloated military budget. That's a whole nother story. And then we have to deal with what's called the false moral narrative of religious nationalism that says if you believe in, if you want prayer in the school, if you're against gay people and against women and for guns and for tax cuts to the wealthy, then somehow you're on the righteous side of God, which is a form of heresy. I'd love to come back and talk to you about moral fusion, interlocking injustices, and why we have to have an intersectional movement like we're building.
You have an open invitation. We'll be reaching out to your team. My producer just said Reverend Barbour for vice president. So that says it all about this interview.
Let's make CNN bring us on together too. Let's do that.
I would love that. Absolutely. I'm gonna put that in my CNN producer's ear.
Yeah, you and me. Let's do it.
Absolutely. Make that happen. Thank you so much, Reverend Barbour, for sitting down with us and helping us understand what's going on in this country. Wow. What a treat to be able to talk to one of the country's leading voices on poverty and racism, and who's on the battleground, on the front lines fighting for equality. I love when he talks about we've got to do this from the bottom up. So again, thanks so much to Reverend Barbour. We got one more guest. I'm excited about this guest as well. Her name is Rebecca Dixon. She is the executive director of the National Employment Law Project. And this nonprofit has been on the front lines of fighting to ban the box, to prevent people who've been previously incarcerated from finding employment. Good morning, Rebecca, and thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, I'm sure you had a chance to listen to Reverend Barbour, and his words are so inspiring, and you kind of forget about what's about to happen on July 25th with these millions of people that are going to lose that $600 payment. And although we want to remain hopeful, what are you thinking, and what is your nonprofit doing around what's likely to come, which is either the complete elimination of this additional payment or the substantial reduction of it?
Congress must extend these vital benefits. The UI benefit is the primary financial support for families in this health crisis. This is a public health crisis. It is unlike anything we have ever seen. If you look at the amount of folks who have applied for unemployment insurance benefits since March, so over a 4-month period, that 4-month period blows out of the water the whole 20 months of the last recession. So that's the level of devastation that we are talking about when we're talking about folks losing their benefits. We're talking about folks losing 2/3 of their income immediately, and all of that income falling out at a time when we see an uptick in the COVID cases. So places that were open are reclosing. We're seeing also the expiration of the moratoriums on rent and mortgage. That is all coming together at one time. There's not a worse time to actually to take these benefits away.
And I know, Rebecca, a lot of people feel pretty powerless. They feel like there's not a whole lot that they can do to impact the decision making of these Republican senators, as well as Congress people who are going to be voting on some version of the HEROES Act that's been passed by the Democratic Congress. What can what advice can you give people who just feel like that they're powerless in this process? You and I know that they're not. So how can you help people understand what role they can play?
Sure. We should not lose sight that Congress works for us. And we are joined together with partners across the country, and we are demanding that Congress extend the $600 benefits for as long as this crisis lasts. We know there simply aren't enough jobs. So folks out there can follow the activism and participate in the activism to preserve these benefits by following the hashtags #ExtendUI and Save the 600. So there is a lot of activity going on right now to put that pressure on Congress to keep these benefits in place. It is their moral duty to take care of the folks in this country, as Reverend Barbour was mentioning, and the time is now. So I would encourage folks to get involved on social media with those hashtags, and if they connect there, they can find opportunities to get involved.
What about stimulus payments, Rebecca? We know that Democratic lawmakers also wanted there to be an additional cash payment to families, similar to the one that was paid out in April, the $1,200. Is it your sense that any new stimulus legislation will also include additional cash payments to families?
That would be the best possible outcome. because we know that those payments often get to families faster than the UI benefits. Your other guest who is still waiting for her benefits. So we've had these backlogs on phones and computers. So it seems that, it's not just one solution, but we need multifaceted solutions. And so absolutely the stimulus, an additional stimulus should be a part of this package.
And how do we help change this narrative that's being put forward now, Rebecca, by Republican lawmakers primarily and the president, that somehow the extension of the $600 benefit or the additional payment of any kind of cash, de-incentivizes workers? And they give a story, I think I read, where Mitch McConnell or one of the Republican senators said they talked to a business owner that had 250 workers. He tried to bring some of those workers back, and some of the workers says, no, I'm getting more money on unemployment than I would get if I came back to this job. They use those, singular stories to suggest that that's what's happening all over the country. How do we fight back against that narrative?
We fight back against that narrative by making it clear that working families do not need an incentive to work. And work provides a lot more than just an income. Most of us get our health insurance through our jobs, and most of us also build deep connections with our coworkers at our jobs. So work is more than just a paycheck. And then we also know that for folks who are losing their unemployment benefits, they are also most likely have lost their health care at their job. And so if you have to pay COBRA, which is, paying the full freight for your own premium, $600 is not going to go very far. So there is no literal reason to do this. As we talked about, as your other guest mentioned, if there was a $15 minimum wage. So because we are underpaying workers, particularly women and workers of color, we're going to now say that we need to take away a benefit because we've been underpaying folks for, forever, basically.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining me this morning. Such an important conversation. People's lives are literally on the line. For some people, it's a life or death situation as we all wait to see, what's going to happen with respect to the HEROES Act or any negotiated bill that may come out of this Congress. Hopefully, it's sooner rather than later because people are really hurting. But again, thank you for all the great work that you're doing, and thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Wow, this has been such an incredible show. Incredible in the sense that the lives of people that have been impacted by COVID-19, across this country, those stories are so compelling and so powerful. And we've heard so much about the physical devastation of COVID-19, but the economic devastation is just as dire. And when you see hardworking, ambitious young women saying that they may have to make a decision between buying food or buying gas, it's really heart-wrenching to me as a mother and as a person, who works a ton of jobs. And so even the thought that somebody would sit at home when they could work is really offensive to me. So again, thanks to all of my guests for joining me in this critical conversation. Big shout out to my production team and our sponsors. You can follow me and continue to follow this important conversation because on the special report, we're talking about it all. Race, politics, economics, we're having those uncomfortable conversations. So follow me at Ariva Martin where you can continue to be a part of that conversation. Before I get out, I just have a couple of words I want to leave you with. There are almost 4 million coronavirus cases in the United States and over 143,000 people have died. We can't fly to Canada. We can't fly to Europe. We can't fly to 30 other countries. Hell, Governor Cuomo doesn't even want people from California flying to New York because of the out of control nature of this virus and the poor national and in some cases state responses to this virus. And it is in the midst of all of this that this week, Americans across this country will lose their much needed unemployment benefits. And we know it's going to cause millions of people to be evicted, forced to stand in long lines at food banks, and to decide between paying their utility bills or paying for much needed medication. And despite this well-documented economic devastation that Americans are facing because of COVID-19, the Republicans and Trump's chief economic advisor, they have the unmitigated gall to suggest that this benefit, this $600, is preventing people or de-incentivizing them from going to work. Trump's advisor called this benefit excessively generous. You know, and at the same time they're making this bogus claim, these same GOP lawmakers are pushing for another massive tax break for the biggest corporations and the richest people in the world by way of a capital gains tax holiday. It's ridiculous that we have to make the case for why people should receive unemployment and that Americans are out of work somehow because they're lazy or because they've just decided that they want to Netflix and chill rather than go back to work. Tens of millions of Americans are out of work because of the virus, because the government told people to stop working, and because the government ordered businesses to close their doors to flatten the coronavirus curve. Workers and businesses followed the instructions of the government, and now they are being punished. But rather than allow 20 million people to lose this benefit and plunge millions of people into poverty, this government needs to act. It needs to act with all deliberate speed to extend the benefits at the same $600 level, not some measly $200. They need to make an additional stimulus payment to individuals. They need to extend funding to small businesses and nonprofits. And this country's top priority should be making everyday workers and everyday people healthier and protecting the economics of everyday people. The priority should not be making wealthy people wealthier. Anything short of that is inhumane, it's immoral, as you heard Reverend Barbour say, and it's a downright dereliction of duty of any elected official that fails to vote in favor of protecting Americans from financial ruin. At the special report, we want Mitch McConnell and crew to know that we are all watching. Y'all be safe out there. Don't forget to wear your mask. And remember, we are in this together.